to be part of this seminar. At this particular time, anytime, but specifically at this particular time, I think the journey of self-discovery is of great importance, that we give our time, give our energy, and our endeavor for this science, because according to the Vedic literatures, it is a science. The journey of self-discovery is as valid a science as any on the face of this planet. In order to understand the whole process of the journey of self-discovery, we have to understand one very important thing. What are we referring to when we say the self? What is that we are referring to? Now, we have different perspectives. When a person says, myself, or uses that pronoun in that regard, there are many different connotations to that word depending upon the application and depending upon the applier, that person who is applying the use of that term self. You have a very generic material perspective of self. We could talk about the self as the body, as a combination of elements that through some miracle has been motivated with life. We could talk about it from that. This is myself in that regard. And many people throughout the face of this world think of self in that regard. So is that what we're talking about? To know your body and to know your senses and to know your ethnicity or your religion, the traditions that you're a part of? Is that what we're talking about here? Another aspect of self, when we get a little deeper, especially from the Vedic paradigm, you talk about Atman. And Atma is referred to as the self. It's referred to as the self in relationship to the individual, but it also refers to the universal self, the life force, the all-pervading spirit that everything comes from. It's the wellspring for all living entities and all life and all creation. We could talk about the self in that regard. When you have a concept from the Buddhist perspective, the self is purely in the moment. It's a combination of all the elements and consciousness, and it's momentary. It's moment by moment by moment. Usually the Buddhists refer to self-realization in that regard, to understand that the combination of elements and what it causes consciousness, and to be in that moment, because everything else is an illusion, and the real goal is to achieve this kind of voidistic state. No soul, no God, no involvement in that way. So is that what we're talking about when we're talking about self? Then you can look from the paradigm of Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras. He's very specific when he talks about the self. He talks about the self in tandem with the material nature. And the Sanskrit word for that is Prakriti. That's the material elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether are the gross elements that are being referred to when we talk about Prakriti. Mind, intelligence, and ego are the subtle elements, but they are still elements, because oftentimes when people think of self in that regard, they may think of the self as thought. But according to what we're talking about here from the Patanjalian perspective, self is not that. Self is not the elements, but it is the force, the living force, which moves or motivates those elements or gives life to it. Just like we can see an analogy to understand this is if you have a fence, and the fence is metal, made of metal, like a cyclone fence, chain link fence, whatever. That metal, when you touch it, it's cold and there's not much of a response. But if you infuse that metal with energy, electric energy, like when I lived in North Carolina some years ago, I had two German Shepherds, and I kept them outside, and they had a big pen. And in order for them not to get out of their pen, because if they did, I could get fined and so many things like that. We had to keep them in the pen unless I personally took them out. So when I asked the animal control, how do I keep, these are big dogs, sometimes they can jump over or climb over, etc. She said, well, you have to do what farmers do with their farm animals, horses or cows. They electrify the fence. So that's what I had to do. I had to buy a transformer and hook the transformer up to the fence. And the fence, the metal fence, when the transformer was hooked up to it and turned on, the metal fence now served as a conduit for energy, electrical energy. So if you touch the metal fence, you actually got an electrical charge, because at this point, matter, the metal, was now infused with electricity, the energy, and it took on a whole other different context. So that's what Patanjali says about Prakriti and Purush, that the elements that the body and the mind are made of are inert. They're not filled with life. Even there's thought that goes through it and so many things. This is a result of energy being infused into those elements. And that energy, according to Patanjali and other Vedic yogic texts, that energy is called consciousness. It's in Sanskrit, it's called Atma. Also in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna refers to it as Jiva. And Jiva comes from the root word Jiv in Sanskrit, and Jiva means life, to live. So when, according to Patanjali, there's two basic forces going on in this world. There's the material elements, which are inert, and then there's Purusha, which is spiritual energy. And for the body, which is comprised of the 8 elements that I referred to, the body, when it's infused with this force, this jiva, this life force, it takes on the qualities of life, and how the qualities of life motivate the energy, the material energy that it's coming in contact with. So Patanjali talks about it, the self, in that regard, understanding the distinction between what is the material dimension of your existence as opposed to the living or the life or the spiritual dimension of your existence. So his whole reference to self is to get beyond the material influences that come with the material elements and connect. Thus, we have the word yoga, to connect with our true nature, the spiritual nature, the Purush nature. So that's another aspect of self. And the third is from the Bhakti Yoga perspective. And as I said in Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna talks about in the 2nd chapter, particularly the Sankhya Yoga section of the 2nd chapter of Gita, verses 12, the 2nd chapter, verses 12 through around 33 or so, he is referring to Jiva, which is that life force, that living force, that atomic living force. He gives an analogy, Krishna does, gives an analogy that is referred to in some of the Upanishads, of the particle. Just like there's a particle of sunlight, very, very minute, and the multitude of particles make up sunshine, which is emanating from the sun. So from the Bhakti perspective, the jiva, or the soul, or the Purusha, as Patanjali calls it, is this particle of energy, spiritual energy, known as Brahman, which is the life, the force, the living force. And the presence of that life force in material elements motivates it. So while the Bhakti system, it contains elements of the perspective that I mentioned previously of the one universal self, and it contains elements of understanding from the Patanjali, or the yoga perspective by Patanjali, the distinction between matter and spirit. Gita takes that a little further, and in relationship to what is the self, he takes it a little further in the sense that he describes it. He gives some very nice verses. The first verse that I'll refer to is, he describes it as being individual. Never was there a time when I did not exist, Krishna, nor you, Arjuna, who he's speaking to, nor all these kings on the setting of the battlefield, nor any living entity. Never was there a time when we did not exist, nor in the future shall we cease to be. So Krishna makes reference to the jiva, to the soul, to the self, as an independent, individual particle of spiritual energy that is full consciousness. Just like we have a body, and anywhere that you poke your body or pinch your body, you have consciousness, don't you? If you take a needle, sometimes a doctor will take a blood sample by pinching the tip of your finger. You feel the pinch. You feel sensation in your head. You feel sensation in your toes, the soles of your feet. You feel sensation in the palms of your hand. Any part of your body, you feel sensation. Feeling that sensation is consciousness. Consciousness is described as awareness, awareness of our ability to exist and to interact with the world around us. So Krishna first describes the self as individual. It's an individual entity. You, me, animals, birds, fish, plants, anything that displays the qualities of life and growth and development and the ability to produce offspring, and the factor that it will diminish and then eventually deteriorate and die, anything like that is considered having the presence of the self or the soul, according to Gita. And then Krishna makes other distinctions to help us understand what he is referring to. And he's referring in the next verse, he says as the embodied soul. So here he says, he's making a distinction. As the jiva, as the soul, as the self is embodied, is encased within the material elements, the earth, the water, the fire, the air, the ether, the mind, intelligence, and ego. And we can see our body, in its solidity is earth. In its liquidity, it's water. When it gives off heat, that is the fire. The air, we breathe air, we take in air. And according to Ayurveda, there are several types of airs within the body that helps movement and function, and also dispersion of consciousness throughout the body. So the body is given consciousness or awareness of its own nature and the nature of others through the presence, according to Gita, of the soul, the jiva. Prior to that and after that, without the presence of the soul, it is just so many cells. Prior to the soul's entrance into the Prakriti, it is just a cluster of cells called ovum. Within the womb of a woman, it's called the ovum. And when does that cluster of cells begin to manifest symptoms of life? When it is penetrated by the sperm. The combination of the sperm, which is the carrier of Purusha, into the ovum, which is the carrier or the conglomerate of Prakriti, of elements, when that collision or that penetration occurs, then you see transformation. A transformation takes place. Almost immediately, those cells begin to react in a way that eventually gives shape and form to a human body and consciousness within that human body. So this is what Krishna is saying here. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth, from youth to old age, and similarly passes into another body at death, a sober person is not bewildered by such a change. So that verse is so deep, so deep in terms of a description of what is the soul, what is the self, that one thing he says, there is a soul, that soul is encased in elements. Those elements go through change. That change is called boyhood, youth, middle age, old age, ultimately deterioration and death. So he describes that life or that sequence of events as separate from the constant factor, which is considered the self. The self is considered the constant factor. The elements, the prakriti, is considered the changing factor within the realm of our sphere of influence. So Krishna gives us some insight, some very, very graphic insight into the nature of the self. So when I'm discussing here the journey of the self, I'm going to be referring to that description, which is prominently or preeminently given to us in the Bhagavad Gita. Like I said, peripherally it is touched upon in other perspectives, but from my perspective, the most comprehensive vantage point that we can have of the self, and thus discovery, is from the Bhagavad Gita. Now we talk about the necessity. So we have the self, and we're saying, for argument's sake and for presentation's sake, we're saying it is a soul that has individuality, it has independence, it has the characteristic attributes of eternality. It is not subject to what the elements are subjected to, the earth, the water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego are subjected to. They're subjected to the influence of time and thus degeneration. That is not what we're talking about when we say discovery of the self. We're trying to discover that nature, that natural instinct, that which creates a natural tendency and a natural instinct to experience pleasure all the time. Because the argument is, if we were actually the elements and not some force greater than that, then where would we get this notion about being happy forever, being blissful forever? Where would we get that notion? Because it's not contained within the knowledge cycle of the elements itself, because within the knowledge cycle of the elements is temporality. When you ask people, about what's going to happen to you, well, I'm going to grow old, I'm going to eventually grow old and die, and that's going to be me. That's going to be my existence. And people say like that. But then, do you want that? And most people will say, no, I don't want that. What is it that you want? Well, I would like to be eternal. I would like to live forever. I'd like to be free from these problems of old age and disease. I used to be an administrator, the director of an assisted living facility. And I had a great deal of realizations when it came to old age and its effects by dealing with the residents, because the residents of an assisted living facility are usually anywhere from 55 and beyond. Now, from where I'm sitting, and my 55 seems to be very young, but at the time, 55 was considered old age. So anywhere from 55 and above, most of these residents are there. And you could see very graphically, those that were still present, had presence of their mind, they didn't want to be there. And in fact, one gentleman, I remember, he was ordered by the court to leave his home and go to an assisted living facility because he was losing his memory. And they were finding that he was forgetting to sleep, and forgetting to drink water, and forgetting to take his medications. So on a couple of occasions, they found him unconscious. He had no family, no wife, no children. He was a bachelor. And, there was no one to check on him. He was self-sufficient in that he had a good government job all of his life, so he had good benefits. But what happened was, I think he was 88 at the time, he was his memory was fading quite rapidly, and he was forgetting to do things which would keep him alive. And on a couple of occasions, the police had to break in and actually save his life, call emergency medical transport and get him to the hospital, et cetera. So after the third time, his people who were his friends actually asked the court to please do something about it because otherwise he would just die. And the court did. They determined that he wasn't capable to live by himself, and he had to be removed from his house, and he was removed without his permission. He didn't want to go, and he wanted to maintain this independence. He wanted to maintain his individuality. And in his mind and in his perspective, he was not thinking that he was going to die. And a lot of people are afraid to come to grips with that reality that I am going to die. Because why? The point I'm making here is intrinsically, when we think about what we are feeling intuitively, we do not want to die. Because according to the logic of the self and the logic that the saints and sages of the past operated upon, because that is our nature. That is our true nature, and not the nature which comes along with the body, the elements, the mind complex, the body and the mind complex. That is not the temporality. That is not our true nature. Our true nature is eternality. So, discovery of the self means to connect with that intrinsic nature that we are feeling, but we can't put our finger on it. And people say, well, you can't see the soul. You can't see the self. So how do we know, we're not going to go on a wild goose chase, the discovery of the self, of the wild goose chase. I'm getting feedback here, so I don't know who's on. And, the Sankhya Yoga Sharirika has a very nice explanation, I thought, a very logical explanation as to the answering this question, why I can't see the soul. So in the Sankhya Yoga Sharirika, it describes there are many instances of things that exist but can't be perceived. And then there in the Sankhya Yoga pages there, it describes various instances that something will exist, but you may not be able to perceive it. The first one, it says, is excessive distance. If something is very, very far away, can you see it? Can you perceive it? No. Only now, through modern technology, can you perceive, but actually, can you perceive it other than with any other assistance from technology? No. So excessive distance will prevent you from perceiving something that exists. So that's one logical statement coming. So when we say, I can't see the soul, well, you can't see your relative that may be in India or maybe in Australia. And the only way you'll be able to even know if they're existing or not is through the use of modern technology. But prior to modern technology, that wasn't possible. So excessive distance, extreme nearness, other than with assistance, can you see your eyelids or your eyebrows or the back of your head? So extreme nearness also causes the inability to perceive something directly. So Sankhya Yoga is describing it that way. So yes, there is a soul. No, at this point, you may not be able to perceive it, but at a point where you equip yourself properly, according to the journey, the science of discovery of the self, you can equip yourself properly. Just as you can equip yourself properly to see your relatives in India or Australia or Italy through use of WhatsApp or other forms of technology. Also, the science of discovery of the self gives you a process or a system by which you can perceive that which at present is imperceivable, which is called the soul. Defects of organs. In other words, if a person is deaf, they can't hear. If a person is blind, they can't see. So if there's some impediment with the sensory system that picks up and able to perceive, able to have perception, then it won't be able to. Does that mean because a blind person cannot see something that does not exist? Or a deaf person, because they can't hear something, then that melody does not exist? So Sankhya Yoga is saying, no, these are instances of things which you cannot perceive, circumstances, but yet things do exist. Inattention. Some people get so spaced out that they don't see, they don't know that there's, something going on. How many people have gotten into car accidents because they were off in another world and they didn't see the light? So for them at that moment, light didn't exist. The traffic light didn't exist. Why? Because of inattention, inattentiveness. The traffic light didn't exist. And they're driving and driving, and then they're in their mind, they're in their headspace. And for that moment, there was no existence of a traffic light. Only when there's collision, or a policeman comes, you hear the siren, oh no, I'm getting a ticket. You get a traffic ticket, right? You didn't see the speed limit sign. Does that mean it didn't? But officer, I didn't see the speed limit sign. I didn't see it was only 45 miles an hour. And the cop's going to really buy that, right? Okay, you didn't see it, so therefore it does not exist. So therefore you're not subjected to that law? No. That won't work in any courtroom. Sorry, folks. No matter how many times it's been tried, it never works. So inattentiveness is another thing which blocks perception of reality. It blocks perception of something that does exist. Minuteness, like subatomic particles. Do they not exist? Prior to the ability to equip ourselves to perceive them, they didn't exist. Now all of a sudden they exist. Why? Because we've equipped ourselves with an ability through, whatever mechanisms they have right now. I'm a bit dated in my science, but whatever mechanisms they have to see subatomic particles, they can witness it, take pictures of it, etc. The point being, in actuality, from the naked eye, you can't see it. You have to equip yourself. So from our naked eye, we cannot perceive the soul. We have to equip ourselves. We have to equip ourselves with the proper perspective, the proper vision that will allow us to understand the nature of the soul, the symptoms of the soul, how to intuitively perceive that soul, to discover it. And that is the whole system of yoga, and the whole direction of yoga is to give us a strategy by which we can perceive it. Another way of obstructing perception of something. It's like, can you see that which is behind the wall? Let us say I bring you into a room that you've never been into. I mean, you may be sitting in your bedroom or your office or wherever, and you know what's on the other side of the wall because you experienced it by direct perception. But if I bring you into a room that you've never been into and you do not know what's on the other side of the wall, and I tell you on the other side of the wall is $1 million in gold bullion, Will you believe me or not? You will probably say, I don't believe you. I don't see it. I don't perceive it. So things that obstruct our vision of the existing factor, the existing thing, are merely that, they're obstructions. But it does not nullify the existence of the reality that is beyond the obstruction. Seventh point that Sankhya Yoga makes is suppression. Every morning, my wife and I go to the beach. We go to a beach here, maybe 8 minutes from my house. They call it Bark Beach. It's where, people take their dogs, and it's the closest beach to us. And we go around 5:30 in the morning, and it's dark. And we're the only two people on the beach, and we're chanting our japa. It's dark. There's no sun. There's at times there's moon, and you can see starlight, stars. So I can perceive the North Star. I could perceive Mars. I could perceive the various constellations that are there. But what Sankhya Yoga says, when there's suppression, sometimes you lose the ability to perceive that which exists. So when the sun rises, when you have sunrise and the full illumination of the sun, and you look at the same spot where the North Star was or is, do you see it? You don't see it. You don't perceive it because it's been suppressed. What has it been suppressed by? The bright sunshine. So that's yet another example of something that exists, but in that moment, it does not exist. And the last one it talks about in the Sankhya Yoga Sharirika is intermixture with something similar. In other words, you take a yellow split mung, right? And you see that yellow split mung and its shape and everything, and you can notice a lot of details about it. But then put it in a bag, a 10-pound bag of yellow split mung, and shake it up, and then try to find it. Will you be able to see? No. By intermixture with something similar, then it becomes imperceivable. So here we're talking about 8 instances which can cause us not to perceive something that is real. So these examples are used to highlight the fact that the soul does exist. It is a reality. And just because you cannot see it does not necessarily negate the reality of the soul. So therefore, if you can at least accept that principle, that there can be a reality beyond my perception, you can accept that reality, and you can accept the reality of a system or a strategy that will equip you with the ability to perceive it, then you can journey on this path, this discovery of the self. You can actually enter into a strategy called yoga that will help you to perceive the reality of who you really are and what is the true nature of the self. So Patanjali, I like Patanjali a lot because Krishna gives philosophy of the soul and its relationship with the Supreme Soul. Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras gives the psychology of the self, the nature of the self. And one of the things he describes in great detail is, Krishna in Bhagavad Gita says there's earth, there's water, there's fire, there's air, there's ether, those are gross elements, inert elements. Mind, intelligence, and ego, those are also elements, subtle elements. But with the presence of the jiva, they become activated. So Krishna talks about that. So Patanjali in his Yoga Sutra says, yes, that is there. The prakriti, those 8 elements, both subtle and gross, and the presence of Purusha, yes, that is there. And then he describes the complexity that is created by the intermingling of Purusha and Prakriti. And what does that mean? That means when Purusha enters into those 8 elements, it activates them. And all of those elements, it's easy to understand the gross elements and how they work, how the blood flows, how the air comes in and out of our lungs, how the heat of digestion, the solidity of the body and the bones and the muscle. We can understand that. Anyone can, objectively look at that through anatomy. But when we talk about the subtlety of material elements, mind, intelligence, and ego, that gets a little bit more because they're subtle, and it's very hard to perceive those elements. But what Patanjali talks about is their function, how the presence of Purusha, in order to really experience being in those material, how does Purusha, a spiritual being, interact with those elements? What is the cause of those interactions, and what is the function? So when that spirit, that Purusha, that energy, that subtle spiritual energy begins to activate it, then there's function to mind. There's function to intelligence. There's function to ego. In and of themselves, without the presence, they are just elements, and they serve no real function. Give life to them by the presence of jiva, the soul, then they have function. The mind has function. The mind serves as a repository for all the sense perception that is going on. Isn't it amazing how much sense perception is going on? When we simply think of how much information our senses are taking in on a moment-by-moment basis, it is mind-boggling. It is staggering. What makes sense of all of that information that's coming in? The mind. The mind takes it in, it categorizes it, it stores it, it gives structure to chaos, etc. So that is the function of the mind. It's sometimes called the sixth sense. It is a repository of sensory perception. The eyes that see, the ears that hear, the nose that smells, the tongue that tastes, the body and skin that feels. All of those perceptions that are coming in goes through that element which has been activated by the presence of the soul and gives purpose and function to all of the sensory input that's there. Then there's buddhi, and that means intelligence. That comes from the word, root Sanskrit word buddh, and that means to wake up. So there's an intelligence that gives us the ability to discriminate things that are coming in, all this chaos of information, and it's given some structure and some order and some form. Buddhi gives that, so we give some understanding to all of that. Buddhi is a function of thought connected to judgment, discrimination, knowledge, ascertainment, and will. Buddhi is actually a substance, a very subtle substance, that when it comes in contact with those perceptions that we are seeing, like if I look at a tree and that perception comes in, it's buddhi in its subtle form that forms itself into a tree. That's why did they change signs? Instead of writing signs now, don't smoke, now they have the circle with the line through it and the cigarette. It's because the mind responds faster to images, because the mind thinks in images. And it's the buddhi, the intelligence, which forms the images and discriminates and places understanding and gives the ability to judge and ascertain what it actually is. That function of buddhi is given by the jiva. And then there's ego. It's called ahankara, which literally translated means false identity. It means it misidentifies the body to be the nature of the self, the body to be who I am. We could do a very simple test. Everybody, you touch your nose. You touch your ears. You touch your chin. You touch your arm, your left arm. You touch your right arm. You touch your left leg. You touch your right leg. Now you touch yourself. Now people will go, no, that's your heart. No, that's your chest. Other people go like this. No, that's your body. No, you touch yourself. So it is a vision that has to be acquired. It is a vision that transcends ego, because ego means how the mind identifies itself. I'm a white 72-year-old Caucasian, and all the other numerous layers that come in relationship to the 8 elements that I've existed in for 72 years. And then it gives me an identity. My parents named my identity. My guru named my identity. And people know me by that identity, you see. But in actuality, when we are on the discovery of the self, that's not us. That is just a temporary designation. It's a temporary identity that's there. So what is, because we have little time left, things go so quickly. So what is process of understanding or discovering the self? Pran Govinda so very nicely, last night he said something that really struck me. He said that it is a journey of turnaround, not a journey of distance. Magellan went a great distance. Marco Polo went a great distance. Christopher Columbus went a great distance. Alexander the Great went a great distance. They put one foot in front of the other, and they traveled a great distance. Did they discover the self? No. Therefore, journey of the discovery of the self is a turnaround. It's to actually see the self in relationship with the Supreme Self. There's a nice quote which comes from Marcel Proust, who was a French philosopher. He said, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." So the journey of the self, or the self-discovery, is a journey of turnaround. Not that we just move, that's rajasic. That's action, always action. That's doing. It more comes from a platform of sattvic, which is being. Understand the nature of our being, of our existence. And it's the process of yoga. It is the strategy which has come from the Supreme Self, given to the conditioned selves to realize its true nature. Patanjali describes yoga as yogas chitta vritti nirodha, to make the mind calm, placid, so that you can actually develop a perception of the self. Otherwise, what's going on? We're thinking thoughts all the time and thinking that's our self. Research has proven that 48% of the time we are not in the moment. We are in the future, we are in the past, we are somewhere else other than where we're supposed to be. I told my son the other day, the most important instruction I can give you is if you can be in the moment. When you're in class, be in class with your teacher. When you are studying violin or harmonium or mridanga, you be in that class. You don't be somewhere, you don't be on iPad with Pokemon or whatever. You be in that class. I told them, that's the most important instruction I can give you right now. And of course, the instructions of what to focus on as the goal of life in terms of your strategy. And that's what we need. Discovery of the self means, what goal are we shooting for? So we need a strategy, and that's where yoga comes in. That's why Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, I've given you this process of yoga, Arjuna, so that you can realize the nature of the self and you can experience. Yoga is not just mental, it's not just physical, it's experiential, and it's intuitive also. So it needs to contain within its process the ability to purify ourselves from conditioning. And as Pran Govinda said last night very nicely, he said, purification leads to transformation, right? Transformation leads to satisfaction, right? That means true experience. Patanjali says the same thing. When you understand, when you perform yoga, you are calm in mind, you are peaceful in mind. Krishna says you neither hate, you're equipoised. The first definition that Krishna gives in Bhagavad Gita of yoga is samatvam and karma kaushalam. Those are the two definitions that Krishna first gives of that strategy he's talking about. The strategy to calm the mind so that you can see the true nature and experience the true nature of the self. And karma kaushalam, it's the art of work. It's the art of existing in your temporary environment with the ultimate goal of realizing the purpose of your existence in your temporary environment. That is it. And Krishna is so merciful in Bhagavad Gita. He says there's different aspects. I have, as divinity, I have different aspects. I have my energetic aspect in the form of Brahman, that energy, that underlying energy that gives life to everything. I have that aspect where I'm within the heart of all living entities in the form of Paramatma or Supersoul. So I can give you a process by where you can experience divinity on that level of Brahman. I give you a process of mystic yoga by you can experience the divinity of the Supreme Self next to you, the real self. And I also give you a process called bhakti. And of all the processes, yoginam api sarvesham makate nantaratma. Of all the processes, this is the most comprehensive. And I give you that process by which you can understand you're not only Brahman. That is what you are made of. That is what spiritual energy is. You're not only that, and you not only can realize the presence of Paramatma or Supersoul, that I'm next to you within your heart, but then you can also engage in a love relationship with me. He says, Yoginam api sarvesham, it's the highest, because actually we can use all that we are, all that we be in relationship to that dimension, to that aspect of divinity, and experience the highest form of experience that there is, and that's love. That is what everyone requires, what everyone would like, to be in love. Can anyone deny that? No, I don't want love. I mean, Tina Turner denies it in her song, What's Love Got to Do with It? Love is a secondhand emotion. She denies it because she went through such a hard, suffering, miserable life. And she has to deny it. You deny something you don't experience. But when you experience love, in other words, if you're fortunate, you're blessed with parents that loved you, then you want to be like that. You want to transmit the same thing to your kids. When you have the fortune of experiencing love with your children, well, there's nothing sweeter than the loving exchange. So everyone wants that loving exchange. So therefore, systems that are there, the yoga systems are meant to give us perception of the self by purifying our vision. It could be a vision of Jnana Chakshus, which means a vision of knowledge by which we can understand the nature of ourself, the discovery of ourself. Or Dibyam Chakshus, which means by our surrender and our humility and our love, our offering of love, we're giving it, because bhakti is considered the yoga of grace, the yoga of mercy, and we're given that vision, that perspective. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Tesham satatam yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam. I give it to you. Because if you give me love, I give it to you back. You can't receive love unless you also give love. Because you won't know what love is if you're only expecting to receive it. You'll be duped. But if you give love and you experience the necessary components of loving exchange, like selflessness, affection, respect, kindness, friendship, friendliness, compassion, all of these things are dimensions of love. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that's actually the qualitative nature of the soul. Friendship. I have it here. He said friendship is one nature of the soul. Righteousness, truth, purity, honesty, affection, compassion. These are all the natures of the soul. That's why any valid yoga system will contain these elements. Because by living a lifestyle like that, employing a strategy in your life that contains those elements, they'll actually connect you with those natural elements of the soul. The soul contains those elements. So the strategies of yoga will put us in contact with the self, and put the self in contact with the Supreme Self. And thus we'll experience not only transformation, but santosh, complete contentment, happiness beyond happiness, happiness that has the element of fulfillment. So I see you wanted some questions to be asked. I'll stop here. And if anyone would like to ask a question, thank you very much for your kind attention. This topic is vast.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. It was amazing. So much facts. We learned about it in today's class. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to hear from you. And I saw one chat, one question from Sid, I think. He is asking, when we discover these practicals, do they then come into existence?
When we discover these particles, do they then come into existence? No, they're existent. They are existent. It's a matter of uncovering. Just like there's gold in the ground and diamonds in the ground, there are gems in the ground. It's a matter of going through the process of mining them and then revealing their existence. So they exist, our soul exists, and one of the points that's being made by the ancients is that we can understand the characteristics of the soul. One of the characteristics of the soul is consciousness. The soul emanates consciousness and then distributes it through the airs in the body. And the airs are carried by the blood. And that's why when you say, my foot fell asleep, usually you've cut off circulation. And therefore the consciousness has been diminished in that particular area. So it exists. Now the process that we're talking about, the various processes of yoga, chanting, meditation, they uncover, they remove, just like if there's gold here or diamonds here, you have to remove the earth and find that vein. So we have to uncover it. That's called illusion. We're under an illusion right now that we're something that we're not. And once through the process of self-discovery, we embark in that process of self-discovery, then that gem of the soul, that particle of energy, of light, becomes greater and greater, more and more revealed. I don't know if you've ever come in contact with a person who is very elevated spiritually. They glow. They have a glow. I remember I had a coworker. We worked on some projects together when I was in the music business back in the late 80s and 90s. And he was a strict vegetarian. And he knew I was a strict vegetarian. He says, "What's with you?" He says, "You know, we're both vegetarians." He says, "But you seem to have a glow about you." And that just means that through the process of bhakti that I'm following, whatever little, it can be only minute, whatever little progress, it means it's actually bringing the soul to greater prominence rather than for it to be buried deep within the ego. So that's a brief response to the question. I guess that was Sid's question, right, Sid? Anybody else have a question or a comment? Happy to entertain in relationship to what we have here.
Lakshmi,
Yeah.
this is Sid.
Hey, Sid.
So at the time that I wrote that question, we were talking about subatomic particles.
Right.
And, you know, that they are saying now that all things related to this are nothing but energy, electrical energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question was, you know, when we discover these things, is that how do they come into existence? I'm not speaking about, you know, diamonds. I'm talking about like pieces of electricity.
Uh-huh. Well, they exist. And whether I think one of the points that I was making, whether we can perceive them or not, does not deny their existence. And I think science will agree with that simple point. Just because they were not able to perceive them through whatever technology they've developed, it still did not negate the existence of subatomic particles. Only now, through technology, have they created an ability to perceive it. So it's the same thing with the process that we follow. When we start, it's not like, you do a 6-week course in self-discovery, and at the end of the course, you can see the self. It's not
Right.
like it could be like that if someone is really. Prabhupada told us, my spiritual master told us, you can realize in a second. But because we're complex entities and the complications arise through all of our attachments and all of the samskaras that are there from previous births, it creates a very complex web of attachments that we have to sort through. And therefore, even though the opportunity is there for us for any moment to realize that nature, unfortunately, we don't take advantage of those opportunities because of our attachments. And then as we do the process, to whatever degree of faith that we have in that process, then slowly by slowly, it's a gradual evolution.
Mhm.
And then, and as we evolve, and what happens is, as we evolve, that gives strength to the conviction that this strategy can bring me to that point.
Thank you, Lakshmi.
Yeah, thank you, Sid, for the question. Anyone else would like to ask any question or comment? Okay.
Just a comment from sorry, go ahead, Sid.
I was going to just say thank you.
Thank you
Thank you.
thanks, Sid, for taking the time to be with me today.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Wonderful class, like wonderful and analogies, wonderful. It's like a comprehensive thing. From you took examples from Patanjali's, you took from Bhagavad Gita. You gave a wonderful, comprehensive knowledge, like in 1 hour to study about the self. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I also have a comment, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. I was very happy to hear all the facts about soul, and one thing that you said about the 5 facts: excessive distance, very close proximity, inattentiveness, suppression. All that is not letting us realize ourselves, and then taking a turnaround and trying to follow the yoga system is a strategy that we need to take to understand the soul and realize that we are not this body and the soul, and to realize the happiness. Very sweet session, Prabhuji, and very, very thoughtful and intuitive. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think Rashmi has a question or a comment. Rashmi, you raised your hand?
Yes. Prabhu, thank you first of all for this amazing lecture and knowing about self. So, like I never heard before like this. So wonderful. It is all it does to me is it just makes me so inquisitive to know more, right? So my question, Prabhu, is so now you have so wonderfully explained how the self is. It's kind of subtle, right? You have to know it through a journey. That's what I'm kind of understanding it. So Prabhu, so how I want to start knowing self. If I want to really start, right? What do I do, Prabhu? Like what from where should I start? That's my question.
You've already started.
No, Prabhu, for everybody on the call, right? Like I might have, see, I know information, right? But right now it is not in an order, I feel. So if you can shed some light, Prabhu, like, okay, what's my next step? Like as a neophyte, it's so wonderful that now I feel like I really need to know myself, and I need to find out the goal, because we have been taking so many births, like you said, and building all the samskaras. At least now I need to do something about it. So shed some light, Prabhu. I would be very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah. The process of knowledge from the Vedic paradigm has 4 stages. First is hearing. Second is reflecting. Reflect on what you've heard. The third and most challenging, we can easily, even in the most novice of positions, we can always hear and reflect. You have some people who are professional at that. They're always taking this course and that course, and they're thinking about it, and then they extract a little bit from it and they add it to their soup. They're making a soup or a khichdi or something like that. But according to the Vedas, you hear and you reflect because you may or may not have heard correctly, and you have to be sure of the next step, that you were doing the right thing. So what is the next step? It's assimilation into your life. So having Patanjali in the Yoga Sutra talks about sadhana, and sadhana means to do something over and over again with great conviction and commitment, over and over again over a long period of time with great commitment. And one of the definitions of love given now, one of the primary components of love is commitment. This is what the psychologists are saying in relationship to love. You try to describe love. Oh, what is love? I've asked myself a million times that question. But one of the things that the psychologists are emphasizing right now is commitment, because it is only commitment to a relationship, a loving relationship that you want to have, when you can prove your love and experience your love. Because when you prove your love, then what is the natural result of proving your love? You get it back and you experience it. So it's only through this commitment. You go through the ups, you go through the downs. When you're down, you're still committed, and then you have your ups again, and that way. So we have to prove ourselves through commitment, and then make sure we have a steady diet of assimilating what we are hearing and reflecting upon into our life, even if it's little tiny things. Little tiny things. It is in the detail. What they say, the devil is in the detail. It is in the detail that's there. Tiny. It's not one great big, lightning blast that's going to hit you in between the eyes. It's going to be a gradual evolution. So the assimilation. So the process of bhakti gives you ample opportunity. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, you can cultivate bhakti through matter. You can cultivate bhakti through the body. You can cultivate bhakti through the mind. You can cultivate bhakti through the soul. And you can cultivate bhakti through society. Now that gives us a wonderful palette to paint our destination, our journey. Because it's obvious, body, you can engage the body in service to the Supreme. Specifically, if we're talking about bhakti, we can use our eyes, our ears, our nose, our taste, our touch. We can all use that in engaging in bhakti. We use matter. We have our house. We have a car. We have so many things that are considered matter or material. But those things, our house can become the pilgrimage spot. You can walk into a house and feel the energy, the presence of the energy of the Supreme, because that house is not a house. That house is a temple. And that house has been offered, has been given to the Supreme. So matter, mind, we use our memory. We memorize shlokas. We do so many things in terms of engaging our mind. Memory, thought. What does Krishna say? Manmana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namask. Always think of me. So we have thought. And where will our thoughts go to? It'll go here, there, and everywhere. But the process that you follow helps you to control your thoughts, helps you to be of presence of mind to fill your memory with transcendental things, things of a sublime spiritual nature. Emotion, even our emotions we can use. Sometimes people try to negate emotion. But you can't negate an emotion. It's a psychic dimension of our existence that is a quick trigger. It's a quick trigger aspect of the mind that is much faster than thought. We don't think about why, because it's necessary for our very existence, emotion. So that is another aspect of the mind. Inquiry. It's another dimension. So we can ask questions. When we hear something, we don't understand it, we ask. That's inquiry. That's part of our cultivation of bhakti yoga. And then the gathering of knowledge. These are all ways to use the mind. The body, we use the external senses. Chanting, hearing, smelling, touching, tasting. All in relationship to the Supreme. The soul. Now this one got me. When Bhaktivinoda Thakur said you cultivate bhakti through soul, I was thinking, what does that mean? And what Bhaktivinoda Thakur meant is he said that the natural constitution and characteristic of the soul is friendship, surrender, endeavoring for a connection with the Supreme, acceptance of only the necessities of life, and rejecting pursuit of pleasure as the goal of life. This is cultivating bhakti through the soul, through the nature of the soul. Cultivating bhakti through matter, that means place, time, and actually matter we use in our yoga, in our practice of bhakti yoga, all in relationship to the Supreme. And ultimately, and this one I like very much because I'm a very social person, cultivation of bhakti through society, festivals, glorifying the Lord, having children, and then teaching that children and creating a family unit as an opportunity to practice bhakti, to infuse the household and the living entities that are under your care with bhakti. That is also cultivating bhakti through society, and then teaching others in similar situations. Because as I was going through the paradigm for knowledge, hearing, reflecting, assimilating, what's the fourth one? Sharing. Sharing that knowledge, whatever degree of realization that you may have in relationship, sharing. And that's one of the biggest ones. That has kept me going for 50 years, was somehow or another, by Krishna's grace, I've been put in situations where I always had to teach, to share. And that helps to, create sanskaras, very deep sanskaras. And sanskaras create inclinations. So if your sanskaras are spiritual by nature, then it will create an inclination for further development of your spirituality. So all of these are little tips, practical tips. And you are already engaged in sadhana. And all I would add is you just make sure you keep the best of association that you can possibly keep. And, being part of the group here of Vaishnavas, the Sangha here, I can say that you all are doing a very good job of doing that, really creating an atmosphere, an environment by which anyone puts themselves in contact with that, they'll be inspired. They'll be inspired on their path, their journey of self-discovery.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. That was very nice, very elaborate, very nice answer. Thank you, Prabhu. I really want to hear this session once again because there is so much of information to process. So definitely I will hear it once again, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I share my notes because I feel like, if someone really wants to go deeper, I know it's hard just hearing, and I'm not really inclined nor able so much to put together PowerPoints. And I've also found that PowerPoints slow me down. They're a very good organizational tool, for sure, but I kind of like the freedom from PowerPoint, really. But I do share my notes, and a lot of the points that I make are in those notes. So, just let me know, and I'll text them to you.
Yeah, sure, Prabhuji. Thank you so much for the wonderful class. I hope everyone really enjoyed and got a lot of information. We have recordings and it's also live in Yoga for the Soul. Anybody can go and view it again and again. Very nice start for our journey of self-discovery, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. So we will
Thank you,
meet,
Prabhuji.
we'll meet next week again, 2 p.m. for the next session.
I hope
And this,
everybody joins on time because today we joined a little late and the subject is huge, so we crossed the limit of 1 hour. So please make sure you join on time so we can make sure we utilize the 1 full hour. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining the call today with us.
Thanks, Prabhuji. Thanks, everyone.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Bol, Hare Krishna.